In this video, I'm going to talk about choosing a topic for your research paper. In order to talk about choosing a topic, I'm going to back up and talk about what a research paper is and what it isn't and how it's created, so you have a good sense of what kind of topic is appropriate for you. It's hard to pick a topic if you don't know what you're supposed to be doing in the paper. So I want to start with the basics. What is a research paper and how do you make it, and how will that influence what topic you choose? So let's talk about research papers. Research papers are made of primary and secondary sources. That means they consist mostly of analysis of research done by others. Research papers grow and change as research moves forward. I really want to emphasize this fact because I think a lot of students, when writing a research paper for the first time, get very frustrated that the research leads them in different directions. Sometimes it leads them in the wrong direction and then they get back on track, and sometimes your thesis statement will change. And in this class, it's totally fine to change your thesis statement if the evidence you uncover in your research suggests that you should. For example, I had a student one semester who asked the research question, what is the effect of citizen journalism on newsroom employment and how journalists do their job? And his thesis statement when he first started was that citizen journalism was destroying journalists' ability to do their job and should be fought against, that newspaper journalists should basically try to crush citizen journalism. And as he conducted more and more research and he looked at more primary and secondary sources, he discovered that journalists are actually having a lot of success working with citizen journalists and using citizen journalists, since citizen journalists can enrich the news environment and actually help reporters do their job. And that's the thesis statement that he created, was that journalists should work with citizen journalists in the future in order to increase the number of leads that they get and to increase their readership, and that journalists basically should embrace citizen journalism, which is debatable, right? I could say I think that people working in news should embrace citizen journalism, and I can provide evidence, and you could say no, they shouldn't, and here's my evidence. So he changed his thesis statement based on his research because the evidence that he found was overwhelmingly in favor of the newer thesis. So it's okay that things will grow and change as you move through this research. You may start thinking one thing about your thesis statement, having one argument you want to make, but when you do the research, you realize you're wrong, or you realize there's a more interesting argument, or you realize there's a better argument, and so you change your thesis statement. That's totally okay. I'm not grading you based on if you have the same thesis statement the entire class. I'm grading you on your final paper. Is it an argument that you're making? Are you supporting it with well-researched evidence? And does your thesis statement make sense in terms of your research question and what you found? So I'm not grading you on if you have the same thesis statement every week. It's okay if that statement changes and grows as you do research. In fact, it's preferable if you discover you are wrong about something to change your statement, to say, you know what, I was wrong, here's what I think now, rather than to go with something you think is wrong just because you're afraid of changing it. So don't be afraid to grow and change your thesis statement as you do research. Research papers also further the field in which they are written, so they're not just a summary of everything people already know. It's something you're adding a unique voice or interpretation to the field that other people can learn something from and give something to ponder. So research papers are not just summaries of what is known about a topic, and they're not opinions on a topic. So you don't write a paper that just explains everything we already know about your topic, and you don't just say what your opinion is. Again, you're creating something that adds to the field that's based on research. Research papers do draw on what others have to say about a topic, and they engage those sources in order to thoughtfully offer a unique perspective on the issue at hand. So you're looking at sources and you're sort of interpreting them against each other. So you're looking at what all the research shows and you're sort of analyzing what are the themes that come out of this research. Then you're going to make an argument based on that and give your unique perspective. There are actually two types of research paper, analytical and argumentative. In this course, you are creating an argumentative paper. An analytical paper we're not going to do, but I will talk about what it is so you can see the difference. You've probably written a few analytical papers in your life. So in an analytical paper, you start by asking a question on which you haven't really taken a stance, and then you investigate it. Now, the intent is not to persuade, so you're not trying to convince someone that something is right or that they should do this or that this is wrong or they shouldn't do this. Instead, you're just offering your interpretation of sources to support a particular analysis of a topic. So in an analytical paper, for example, I have a degree in comparative literature. I've written lots of analytical papers. I might look at a text and I might say, the theme of this text is forgiveness, and that teaches us a lesson about forgiving without letting people off the hook for things, because when the author was writing this, this major event was happening, and they were trying to give their perspective on what people should do in response to the event. So I'm not really saying like you should or shouldn't do this or this is right or wrong. I'm saying the way I see this novel, it's a reaction to an event, and the theme of forgiveness is important to that event. So it's my analysis, and I'm explaining my analysis, but I'm not really trying to persuade you. I'm not saying if you don't believe that you're wrong. I'm not saying if you do believe that you're totally right. I'm just saying here's what I think. Here's the analysis that I take from this based on my reading of it and based on these other sources that explain more about the novel or about the author or the event or whatever it is. Now, in an argumentative research paper, the goal is persuasion. So the goal is, at the end of the paper, for someone to be convinced of your argument. And so you're going to introduce the reader to your topic, tell them everything you know about it as a basis, as a foundation, and then you're going to take a stance on it. And the stance is your thesis statement. And the thesis statement has to be debatable. It's not debatable, for example, that social media is helping people across the globe communicate with one another across cultural boundaries. That is happening. We can observe it. It's observably true. So that's not a thesis statement. But it would be a thesis statement to say something like, we should stop doing that. We should stop allowing people to communicate across cultural and country lines, and we should get rid of social media that does that. Now, I would never advocate for that thesis statement, but I use that as an example because you probably disagree with it and you would probably debate me on it. And so that's a thesis statement, right? It's debatable. I might say we should stop allowing social media to help people connect across the globe because I'm anti-globalization, and here's the 5, 6, 7 pieces of evidence why this is a bad thing. And then you can debate that and say, actually, it's a good thing. Here's the 5, 6, 7 pieces of evidence that say it's good, and I disagree with you. So a thesis statement has to be debatable. If you're not sure if your thesis statement is debatable, ask someone to play devil's advocate. Tell them your thesis statement and say, you know what, if you're the devil's advocate, what would you argue against me? And if they can't really argue against you, or their only way of arguing against you is like, I don't like it, then it's probably not a debatable thesis statement. So in an argumentative research paper, you're going to use evidence to support your thesis statement. So again, it's not a summary of what we already know, and it's not your opinion. You're going to pull up evidence from your research to support your statement. So you're going to show the evidence and say, these are reasons that we should or shouldn't do this, or that this or that's going to happen. And here's how it's evidence. Here's why the evidence all adds up to my thesis statement. So for example, we have thesis statements in argumentative papers. We also have them in analytical papers, but you can see the difference here. In argumentative papers, a thesis statement is debatable. In an analytical paper, the goal is not persuasion, so you may have a different interpretation, but I'm not trying to convince you of anything, and you're not necessarily going to debate me on the thesis statement. So an analytical paper might discuss how the increase in TV capabilities online means that the internet is a new threat to TV networks, and will continue, to be so in this year probably. An argumentative paper, TV networks should abandon cable in favor of internet channels. So that's an argument where it's debatable. It's really not that debatable that the internet is a new threat to TV networks. My analysis in this thesis statement is that it's due to the increase of TV capabilities online, but I'm not really trying to persuade you that this is true and ask you to debate me on it. Whereas with the argumentative thesis statement, you can definitely debate me. You can say, no way, TV networks should not abandon cable, and here's the reasons why. So in the argumentative research paper process, you're going to start by selecting a research question, or RQ. You're going to conduct research. You're going to sort of organize what is already known about the topic and try to understand what is not known. in the TV example, it's really not known whether TV stations and networks should or shouldn't embrace the internet and dump cable. We don't really know if that's the right thing to do. There's no evidence showing right now 100% for sure that that's definitely what has to happen. Again, it's debatable. So I'm going to organize what's already known. I'm going to identify kind of what don't we know, and then I'm going to organize evidence for my argument about what is not yet known. So if it's not really yet known if that's the best thing to do, I'm going to say it is. That's my argument, and here's the evidence that supports my argument. Then you're going to develop your thesis statement and write the paper, which is sort of a summary of your research and presentation of your evidence and in support of your thesis statement. So as you can see, the thesis statement actually comes in kind of after the research. In this class, I'll ask you for a thesis statement throughout, and I'm at the early stages, I'm kind of asking for your best guess at what you think your thesis statement might be. If it changes, that's fine. By the time you start putting together your paper and actually writing the paper, that's when I would expect you to have a 100% finalized thesis statement. Now, how does this relate to choosing a topic? Well, now you know what you need to do in the paper. You need to argue for or against something or make a prediction about the future. And so you can start choosing a topic by asking yourself a research question about the topics of the course. So if you're in my 280 class, for example, and the course is about social media, I would suggest looking through the course folders. You'll see the folders have information and readings about location-based services, digital curation, community engagement, privacy, comments, things like that. And then try to see if you can relate those topics to your major or your career field. And if you're in my 280 class, a few examples are listed here. You know, if you're looking at the topics in the course and then maybe a field you're interested in, if you're a journalist, you might ask yourself a research question like, has professional or amateur blogging become as important as mainstream media? And from there, you could have a thesis statement, something like, blogging will soon overtake mainstream media, or blogging will never be as important as mainstream media. Those are both debatable. You could ask research questions like, will social media marketing overtake traditional marketing? What is the role of social media community engagement in growing a small business? And from there, you could have a thesis statement like, small businesses should embrace community engagement and create online forums. Or maybe you have a thesis statement like, small businesses will never benefit from community engagement and should avoid it and not commit time to it. You know, both of those are debatable. So here's just a couple research questions to get you thinking about what a research question looks like. You're welcome, if you're in my 280 class, to use one of these research questions, or to use part of it. How is social media community engagement being used during natural disasters? If you are into politics, you might ask, how is social media community engagement being used during political uprisings or during political elections? So you can sort of mix and match some of these ideas here, but these are what research questions look like. If you're in my 495 class, then when you choose a topic, you want to ask a research question about your creative project. So if you're creating a project in which you present a multimedia online story about poverty in Indianapolis and groups that are working toward eliminating poverty, you might ask a research question about how awareness is best raised through social media. Or you might ask a research question about how websites can elicit donations. What is the connection between experiencing a multimedia presentation online and donating money or becoming aware, and does that awareness translate to something like donating money? So you want to ask a research question about your topic, and by that I really mean, what is it that you're doing? If you're making a website about a multimedia story, look at how multimedia stories are effective through websites, or how websites allow engagement that you don't get in other forms. If you're making like an ebook, look at ebooks. What is the future of ebooks? How are people using ebooks? What kind of things can ebooks accomplish? And choose something based in that area you're working with. So those are just a couple examples for the two main classes I have right now that are working with research questions and argumentative papers. If you have any questions about choosing a topic or you want to run your topic by me, please don't hesitate to contact me. I would be happy to assist you. What you might do is start by just typing out some general things about your interest areas, or if you're in 495, about your creative project. You know, what are the themes in your project, ebooks, dissemination of ebooks, publishing ebooks online for free, and social media dissemination of ebooks, things like that. If you're in 280, you know, look at the course documents and look at what interests you. I'd be glad to answer any questions you have about it, or to look at any preliminary topic ideas that you have if you want some help narrowing them down. Again, I'm available for that as well. Good luck on your search for a topic, and I look forward to seeing all of the research questions that you guys come up with.